All right, first off, the thing I want to say first is just thank you for those of you who did come out today. It does mean a lot to us. I know Sunil is extremely ecstatic about just being able to put together a production like this. Before I get started and get rolling along, I just want to do a couple of shout-outs, just a few things to really put it into perspective and just go about it. First off, thank you to, again, the crowd, the audience who showed up today. I really do appreciate you guys coming out. My friends who are in the back, I see you guys. I love you guys. Thank you so much. You've been there for me for everything. With that being said, guys, I'm going to get into my story. When my students know me as a teacher who has always, always, always shared himself. If there's one thing that I've believed in my teaching career, it's that if you can reach one, that you can teach one. I feel like everyone has to understand that presence of vibe, and if you can't feel or understand or respect someone, they're not going to want to take away from you. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. So, a boy at the age of 14 lost his father. Fast forward at 21, that boy was told that his mother had cancer. And at 22, that same boy lost his home, he lost his mom, and he almost lost his own life. If you can't figure out where this is going, that's the story of myself. Throughout time, everyone will experience some level of loss, and majority will happen before we all see our ends. But I did all of that in my first 24 years. So, to kind of understand where I'm coming from, we have to go back and travel a bit to 2007, when all this began. As you guys know, I am Fairfax County born and bred. I went to Gunston Elementary, followed by Hayfield Secondary, and I even did my student teaching in South County. As you know, it's my second year here at Herndon, and just to set the presence. So back in 2007, guys, I was 14 years old. I was a young kid, a freshman in high school, and everything in my life had seemed to be okay to be best. My family was all right, but we had a lot of problems. The biggest one being a lot to do with my father. My father had a rabid drug addiction, which led him to his own demise. The person who was his supplier ended up taking his life. When you come up and when you're grown and when you're trying to live your own life, one of the first things or one of the first people that you idolize are your own two parents. Before you idolize the superheroes, the Batmans, the Supermans of the world, you look at them because they're the first people to wake you up, keep you together. I mean, from 0 to 5, their whole job is literally to keep you alive. And after losing that, I lost a part of myself. Looking at the topic being a new perspective, thinking about that, literally everything about my life was altered after that moment. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know how to go about living my life in general. One of the most important motivators of my entire life was no longer there with me. I lost every desire to do anything. I'd always been a strong student. School has always been something that I've been good with. But without him there was no purpose for me to want to. Along with that also, I was afraid that maybe I was going to get got too. Maybe the guy wasn't going to stop with just my father. I figured that he was going to continue to push and maybe even end up getting myself. So I left school as a freshman in high school. Not even before the second semester started, I left school for over a month, or just about. My principal at the time had put out a release to every single teacher, allowing them to know the information that had fallen on me and my family. My brother was a senior at the time, and during the whole time, I figured that when I finally decided to go back to school, I'd be welcomed with open arms, and that wasn't exactly the case. Of course, my friends stuck around, and people who knew me well and knew my family well were there, but teachers backlined me. No one wanted to work with me. They just thought that I was that kid, just some kid who was born with a lot of problems and wasn't going to be a whole lot. There were two teachers, two main people who I would say really created and cultivated my perspective. Two people that to this day I'm still in contact with, and I love them both dearly. The first was Mrs. Janet Babick, and the second, and the most important of all as I go through today's conversation, is going to be Coach Bill Angles. So, my first day back to Hayfield High School, when I was there, I can't even tell you that any teacher was nice to me. No one wanted to talk to me, no one would sit by me. The Friends that I had, of course, would sit by me, but we would sit at a lunch table with maybe 2 people, maybe 3 people. People were worried that something was going to happen to them, and to be honest, that's the fault of the principal for the release that he gave out. When I finally walked into Mrs. Babbitt's class, it was the last class that I had of the day, and I walked in, she saw me, and instantly her eyes got huge. And to be completely honest, guys, I don't know how she did it. My freshman year was her first year as a teacher, and I don't know how she put together what she did, but in the last 10 minutes of class, she walked back into the classroom with a cake, and it said, "Welcome home, Mr. Lucas." And that was the first time since losing my dad that anyone had ever really done anything of that level of marvelous for me. The kids in the classroom were throwing streamers, people were hugging me, they gave me a meal, and it meant so much to me. Having only one parent and not having a lot to rely on, being food or time or money or anything like that, it was a solid gesture. The next day, the first class that I had was Coach Engels, and this man, to this day, has an impact on my life. I keep in touch with him, and I always will. It was the first class of the day. Coach Bill Engels was my football coach at the time, and he also taught Algebra 1. My first day back in the class, anyone who knows me knows that math has always been my weakest subject. I've never been strong, but in that class, I remember waking up and going and just thinking that, hey, I've got this. I'm starting to pick up things. I'm answering questions. I'm trying to get vocal. I'm trying to bring myself back into the I need to be in school mode. At the end of class, I walked up to Coach, and I was like, hey, I know that I've missed a lot, but I know I need to impress you if I want to play next year. So let me make up the stuff that I missed. Without a moment's hesitation, Coach looked at me and goes, "Did you understand today's lesson?" To which, of course, my answer was yes. And he looked at me and said, "Well, Mr. Lucas, go on home." I thought he was going to do me just like every other teacher did, pushing me out the door, not allowing me to make up any work, and just making me take an F. So I got angry. I started to backlash at him, spouting at him and screaming, to which he stayed calm. Again, just telling me to relax. I was done for the day. I'd see him next class. And when I asked him why, he looked me in the face and with just a calm demeanor had said, "Because there's nothing for you to make up." When I asked why, he told me he kept the class learning the same information for the past 3 weeks. He would not teach a new lesson because he was waiting for me to come back. Again, I asked why. His response was, "Mr. Lucas, there's 2 ways that someone in your situation ends up. They're either dead or in jail by 20, or they become special. And I'm willing to bet that you're one of the special ones." And at 14 years old, I can lie to you and say that I stood there proud and walked out of his classroom. No, I missed the whole rest of the day. I cried. I sat in his room. I had my mom come pick me up. I was having a horrible day following that moment. But that was the first man. That was the first person to show me genuine affection. And that meant so much to me after losing my dad. I became very clingy to Coach, and he was always around the corner. He was always there for me. Fast forward, let's go ahead and speed off to about college. I finished up at Hayfield in 2011, and I graduated in the top 10% of my class. I was noted as the top 5 black students leaving the school, and I got several $1,000s to go to college, but it still wasn't enough to maintain it. While I was in college, I was paying for myself. I worked for quite a portion of my college career, and throughout the course of it, I had to deal with taking care of the rest of my family back at home and working literally whenever I could. Speeding on into my junior year, I was 21 years old, and I remember being in a 3-hour lecture and getting a text from my aunt. My aunt had said, "Your mother's been rushed to the ICU, and her doctor doesn't think she's going to make it through the night. You should probably get home." As anybody else would, I picked up my bags and I stormed out of class. If anyone knows the distance that it takes to get from here to ODU, it's around 300 miles, so give or take 3-4 hours. I was home in about 2.5, maybe less. I sped the entire way. When I got into the hospital, I was frantic. I was worried that my mom was going to pass before I got home. I was worried that I was going to lose everything. Having only one parent put me in a position where it did not matter what I had to do. I would do everything I could to keep her around. When I walked into the hospital room, she didn't even recognize me. She was so heavily medicated, she was on life support, and she just saw that it was a figure, and she assumed I was a nurse. That was the first of many sleepless nights. The next morning, the doctor came into her room, and it said she developed cancer. My mother had acute myeloid leukemia, and they said that she would have, at best, a few weeks. But in that moment, I started to break down. I looked over at my mother, and I've never seen a fighter like her. She started laughing, and she said, well, I've got more time than that. I said, both of my boys are in their last 2 years of school, and I've got to see them graduate. So I'm going to have at least 12 months. Fast forward again, we get to the second semester of my senior year. As a teaching candidate, someone who's going to be an educator, the second half you spend being a student teacher. You're in a classroom for 14 weeks, literally every single day, doing what a teacher would do for no pay at all. So being unable to work, I was tasked or told that I had to do my student teaching in Norfolk County, where Old Dominion is located. But considering my location with my mom and the situation with her, they allowed me to come back up to Northern Virginia. For anybody that knows the county well, I did my student teaching at South County High School, which happened to be very, very close to my house. I was able to stay at home with my mom and take care of her as much as possible, so we didn't have to pay for a nurse or anything like that to come check on her. I remember countless home from South County and picking her up and going straight to outpatient and being with her day in and day out, sleepless night after sleepless night. And just having to deal. Waking up another day and saying, it's going to be okay, you're going to do this, you'll be fine. And just pushing myself to every single length that it took. I got to my last 2 days at South County, and I had told my students nothing. I didn't even believe my own philosophy where I should share everything with my kids. I didn't want to tell them. But in my last 2 days, my mentor, who was Vera Woodson, or people call her Woody, had told me it was time to make sure that the kids knew. And so my last 2 days, I told them everything. And to be honest, I left the crowd in tears, and I felt horrible about it. I walked out of the classroom, and I went home. A week away from graduation, my mom's doctor had pulled her aside and said, hey, Mrs. Lucas, you're cleared for travel. You should be able to go to your boy's graduation. We get to about 2 or 3 days out, and me being as nervous as I was, I walked up to my mom, and I said, Mom, it's happening. We made it. You're strong enough. We can make this trip. Are you coming? And with tears in her eyes, she looked me in the face and said, if I'm alive. I pray that none of you have had that experience and will never have to have that experience, because that tore me down. My last bit of motivation, my mother, the one person who I wanted to prove to everyone that I could do what I was trying to do. Her support system was like anyone else's, but this is the first time I'd seen her get weak, and that really messed me up. You know, they say as teenagers, when you're growing up and when you're coming into your own, as you get older, you finally start to realize that your parents are getting older, and you pray that you can make something of yourself before they end up passing away. And unfortunately, I was robbed of that opportunity. Going into my graduation that Saturday, the night before, my mom was rushed back into the ICU, put on life support, and completely unable to communicate. I get into my graduation ceremony at 2 in the afternoon, and my aunt texts me and says, hey, your mom's awake, you've got 30 minutes. And so for the duration of that 30 minutes, she spent with me on FaceTime, able to watch her son graduate. She may not have been able to travel, but she was there with me, and that's all that mattered. The next day, I rushed home, and we met with her doctors, and her doctors had told her to her face, Mrs. Lucas, you have 2 weeks in the hospital, and you run the risk of your family not seeing you go, or you can come home for 1 week. What do you want to do? She looked us in the face and asked if she could come home. And of course, we all obliged. During my time at South County High School, a big block hit me, and that was that in my 10th week of my 14, we couldn't afford to keep the house. We were evicted, we were kicked out, and my mom had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to go, but I wasn't concerned about myself. I knew I could figure it out. I had friends, I had leftover family, people who could have taken me in, but she needed particular attention. And thankfully for us, my mother had a younger sister who is an RN, so she took her in. During the next week, my entire family spent taking care of her. We would all take shifts, my brother, my aunt, and myself taking care of my mom. Every single day, I remember applying to jobs and then hearing back from places saying, no, we're not going to interview, no, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. And I knew, guys, I knew that if I could get the interview, I would get the job. That's the person that I am. My highlight has always been talking with people. So, rejection after rejection, it finally stuck that I wasn't getting anything, and it started to really hurt me. A few days into taking care of my mom, the same tasks that she would have done when I was a child, bathing her, feeding her, clothing her, it was my job to do all that stuff. And when those, it really impacts you in a kind of way. About 3 days into the whole process, I remember having to go to the bathroom really early in the morning, like 2 or 3 in the morning. And I felt this weird pang in my chest, and I didn't know what exactly it was. I got into the bathroom, I washed my face, and I cut the light on, and I realized I was completely flush. All the veins in my head had popped, and within seconds, I lost control of my limbs, and I fell out. I hit the ground, and it felt like someone was truly trying to pull my heart out of my chest. And at that point, I thought it was all over. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think, I couldn't put together even like a structured word for help. I must have lied there for over a minute, easily. And through the whole thing, when I finally was able to form a thought, I wasn't thinking, get up, get up. The only thing I was saying is, this cannot be the end. She still needs me. And after about another minute or so, I was able to get my focus back, I could move my fingers, and I stood up. As soon as I opened the bathroom door, my aunt was standing there, wondering what had happened. She heard the thuds, she came running. I explained her symptoms to her, and she said, "You're going to a doctor right now. You need to get checked out." And I told her I couldn't because my mom still needed me. I waited till the next morning, and I saw a cardiologist, and my doctor did an EKG, which was a scan to check on my heart, and they'd realized that I had had several spasms causing me to have a heart attack at 22 years old. The stress ate away at me so much that I could not control myself. Mentally, physically, emotionally, I was spent because I spent every little bit of myself taking care of her. I neglected everything about myself. And I couldn't bring it to myself to tell her that. She ended up dying a few days later without knowing that had happened to me. And I would never have told her because it would have just killed her sooner. On May 15th, 2015, my mother breathed her last breath at 2:15 in the afternoon. She looked me in the face, she told me that she loved me, and she squeezed my hand one last time. I checked for her pulse, it wasn't there. And on that day, guys, I shut down. Every little bit of motivation that I ever had, none of it mattered to me, because now I had no one to impress. Yeah, I could do it for myself, but why would it matter? Why would I want to keep doing this? I fought so hard just to reach the end, and I couldn't even get what I wanted from it. All I wanted was for her to be there the day that I got my first job so that she could say she was proud of me. I have searched for that in so many different avenues, and I haven't found it. It led me into a lot of poor devices. I began drinking more, I began smoking, I had a lot of issues, and it ate away at me every single day. We got to the day of the funeral, and that was the first day that I realized I had to change. At the funeral, I had almost more of my friends than people who had shown up to the actual funeral for her. People, my support system, my friends, my family, and just everyone who was there just with open arms trying to bring me back out of this funk that I hit. And I remember thinking to myself, there's more that I've got to do. I feel like I've been tasked with this whole plan to reach out to students, reach out to my friends, and be that level of inspiration for them. So from that day forward, I told myself that I had to keep fighting, and if I didn't, then why? Why would I still be here? I would not have been left here alone with nothing at that point. I was a boy who had literally nothing, but that didn't change the fact that I wanted everything I could get. Following the funeral, we got into June, and I remember getting a phone call from Vera Woodson, the teacher from South County, saying that Herndon High School was the only school hiring a marketing teacher this year. I needed to call them. Within minutes, I got them on the phone, and I got an interview scheduled for that Friday. All I remember thinking to myself was, I've got to nail it. Driving up to the school, I didn't care what the school looked like, I didn't do anything. I just knew that I had to get this job. And the person who had interviewed me was Laura Waterman. For those of you who remember her, she was an AP here last year. And I blew her away. A week later, I got another interview with the principal who was here last year, Mr. William Bates. And again, I blew him away. Leading up to this, I have told you about a lot of the losses that I suffered with my mom, my dad, almost my own potential life, my house, everything that I had. It drove me to be something better. I always wanted to achieve more. Reckless ambition. I can't seem to get enough of anything, and I always reach for more. I have this eternal greed for other things. But since we've talked about so many losses, let's talk about some things that matter. In 2015, in July, I was hired here at Herndon High School as a marketing teacher. In October of 2015, right before my 23rd birthday, I bought a house. And then going into the year following, 2016, I bought my first car. Even behind everything that set me back, I fought and I pushed to bring myself out of it. I was a foot in the grave, 2 feet in the grave, an arm and a leg in the grave, and it did not matter because I had to win. Some of my friends who are in attendance today have told me that they've needed me. By hearing that, it made me feel like I have another chance at this. I have another shot to fix what I couldn't control, and that meant the world to me. My students who know me, I've shared most of this story with them by now this year, and I really believe that I'm here to reach the students. That's my job. If I can reach you, I can teach you. So, if there's one thing that I can leave you guys with today, if there's one thing that I want you to take away from all of this, it's that in life, in a world of uncontrollable things, if there's one thing that you can control, it is yourself. You control how you react. Are you angry? Are you mad? Do you fight? Do you turn to devices? What do you do? That is all up to you. That's the way life rolls, and that is the only thing that you have power over, but it is the strongest thing to have power over. So those of you in the audience, I challenge you, if there's something sitting on you, some burden that you're looking at, something that you just can't beat, fight it. Keep fighting. The minute you decide to stop fighting, kick yourself. Fight again and keep fighting, and one day, it will be worth it. I promise you it will. And to those of you in the audience who don't know how to go about it, I can't say that I'm the wisest person in the world, but I know that I know what I've done, and I would love to help. I told myself in my teaching career, if I could do one student like Coach Engels did me, I would have completed my career. I didn't care if I reached 1,000, 100, whatever. It did not matter. If I saved one life, what Coach did in 3 weeks saved my entire life. And I thank him eternally for it. Thank you all for listening.